When I was a child, my mother said to me, "If you become a soldier, you'll be a general. If you become a monk, you'll be the Pope." Instead, I became a painter and wound up as Picasso. Artist Pablo Picasso. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. And your art lesson today comes from artist David Boyd Jr. David Boyd is a Georgia-based artist who is compelled to paint Southern Impressionism. Boyd lives in the small rural town of Newnan, Georgia, which is located several miles southeast of Atlanta. Not only is Boyd a fine art painter, he helps run his family-owned and operated art gallery located in the old, beautiful downtown square of Newnan. A very young David Boyd decided early on that he wanted to be a hired assassin. And if that did not work out, perhaps a race car driver. Fortunately, Boyd came from a family who provided him a rich, nurturing environment that steered him towards the visual arts rather than become the next James Bond. His father, David Boyd Sr., is a renowned illustrator known for his work for comedian Jeff Foxworthy. His mother, a school teacher, has a deep love for music and dance. With their loving influence, his life of crime was averted, and now Boyd is one of the finest painters in the South. He's a signature member of Oil Painters of America, as well as the American Impressionist Society. Boyd is compelled to paint the remnants of a different time that has long since given way to the modern world. Old cars, decaying buildings, old storefronts and road signs, rusting trucks and tractors become the focus of his beautiful paintings. Boyd seeks to preserve Southern American life in its current state of decay in what he characterizes as landscapes of rust. I want to acknowledge the role that the Booth Museum had in introducing me to David Boyd Jr. and his art. In previous episodes of The Artful Painter, now you've heard me gush about the Booth Museum in Cartersville, Georgia. I've enjoyed many of the exhibits there and attended workshops, demonstrations, and lectures. While doing so, I've gotten to know the Booth Art Academy manager, Kent Mullinex. A few weeks ago, he reached out to me and asked, "Hey, do you know David Boyd Jr.? He would be a good guest for your podcast. He's the best in the business. You will love David. He's a great artist, an even better person." How could I possibly pass that recommendation up? And so, in this episode of The Artful Painter, I'm happy to share with you this delightful conversation with artist David Boyd Jr. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. I apologize that I stood you up a couple of weeks ago.
Life is life. I'm sorry you had a loss in the family, but
it's just one of those.
And excited.
It's just one of those things. It's just been a crazy couple of weeks, but I'm back in the studio. So
excellent. Well, I've been listening to the podcast, and I really, really enjoy it.
Oh, great!
I'm a big fan of all podcasts, but yeah, this is a really great one for art.
Well, what podcast do you like to listen to?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm a true crime fan.
Oh yeah,
so
okay.
That's my first genre that I really enjoy. But I listen to a ton of art ones that I listen to. Eric Rhodes' Plein podcast is really good.
Yeah, he does good. Yeah,
really great interviews. There's one, a couple of guys out in California. Sergio Lopez is one of them, and I can't think of the name. Waiting to Dry. Yeah, Waiting to Dry, like Waiting to Dry.
I haven't heard of that
the
one.
Name of it. Yeah, it's really good. So Sergio Lopez is a figurative and plein air painter out in California, and a guy named Josh Lawyer, who's who's really, really talented, but I think Sergio went to art school and Josh did not. But they interview a lot of California people and West Coast.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Just kind of a different take, and they just have a casual conversation. Some of them are long; they're like 2 hours long.
Yeah.
And yeah, so those are the main ones that I enjoy listening to.
Well, that's good. So my job is done here. I've learned a new podcast.
Well, there you go. So we got another rabbit hole to go down.
You bet.
There's another one too called the Art Grind podcast, but I haven't really listened to that too much.
art grind. I haven't heard of
Yeah, I
that
think
one
that's
either.
a West Coast one too. But yeah, this is what you're doing is really what I enjoy listening to. Eric Rhodes stuff is good too. It's just nice to have different voices asking different questions for different reasons.
Right. Yeah.
It's good. There's room for everybody.
Well, my approach is, I'm on a journey to learn. Because
we all are.
I'm not on the same. I'm not on the same level. I've just started, and
right.
so I think it brings a different picture, or I may ask some naive questions and things like that. But but other people will ask those naive questions too. So
people are curious and people want to know, and people are jumping in all the time. And I'm not new to it, but I was not that long ago. I think I really started about 12 years ago.
Wow.
So I love listening to people ask questions because I've got questions too.
Yeah. Do you ever find yourself yelling at the TV or the podcast, hey, I want to ask a question?
Yeah, usually that, or you pronounce the name wrong. Here's the correct pronunciation.
I'm guilty of that.
I think we all are.
Especially in art, because I never know how to pronounce anything in art.
Well, unless you've been there or met them or visited that city, chances are you're going to get it wrong and make somebody mad.
So, David, I appreciate you being on the Artful Painter podcast. A few weeks ago, Kent Mullinex at the Booth Museum, he reached out to me. Yeah. He says, hey, do you know David Boyd Jr.? And I'm ashamed to say that at the time I did not know who you were.
Well, I can't fault you for that, but now you do. So
I do, and I'm glad.
For what that's worth.
Yeah. Well, he said you'd be a good guest. So
that's really nice of him.
I'm not setting up, expectations here. But I did go to your. Yeah, go ahead.
So I did send him a check for $20. So do what you can for me out there in the world for $20, and this is what I got.
Oh man, I love Kent. He's a great guy.
He is a great guy.
Doing the things that he does at the Booth Academy there, it's just incredible. But
yes.
But he told me that you would be a good person to have on the podcast. And when he says someone's a good person to be on a podcast, I listen. So I'm so happy to have you on the show today.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I've been listening to your podcast, and it's awesome. So now, I'm honored.
And you know what's neat about this? This is the first time that I'm talking to a fellow Georgian artist.
Yes, we do paint down here in Georgia, don't we?
Yeah, here in the deep South.
In the deep South.
So you hail out of Newnan, which is a beautiful town. I highly recommend people to go see the old downtown square and the surrounding countryside. I've spent many a day, or I spent years, commuting to Newnan. I had a customer down there, which I would visit. I always enjoyed that trip. Yeah.
Well, it's home. I've been here all my life, whether I wanted to be or not. But it's a beautiful place to be, and my gallery and studio are right in downtown, and my life is here, and it just made my life very, very full and very convenient all at the same time.
But now I understand that you originally wanted to be a hired assassin, but that didn't quite work out. Yeah.
When I was 11 or 12, I thought James Bond was pretty cool, whatever it was he was doing. That's what I wanted to do.
So what initiated that career choice change?
Well, I'd always done art, even as a kid, it's the origin story of all artists. I drew all the time, and my dad had a printing business, so there was always an abundance of paper and, a lot of graphic designy stuff going on. I was always drawing. And, I didn't really decide to go to art school really until the last minute. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, honestly, but I was planning on going to Hampton-Sydney College up in Virginia. It's a really small boys' school, and that sounded great, because I'd been to a really small high school. I just like small. But SCAD offered me a scholarship, and I just was like, well, I don't know too many people that have been to art school, certainly nobody in Newnan, so I'm going to try. It sounds like fun.
Not everybody's heard of SCAD. What does that stand for?
SCAD is Savannah College of Art and Design, and it's the original SCAD in Savannah. There is a branch, or I wouldn't even call it a branch. They have an official college here in Newnan, or I'm sorry, in Atlanta. So it's a really big art school.
So I've been in that building there in Atlanta. It was an old Equifax. It was Equifax's office.
Yep.
And so as a software developer, I would go in there. But then, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, I went in for a video users group meeting there. And it was, what a profoundly different place that was.
It's impressive.
Yeah. Did they have like a fine art program, or were you on a graphic design track? What kind of educational track?
I didn't really know. Honestly, I really didn't know. There were a lot of things I was interested in, and I think that was part of the problem. I originally, what I thought would be great was to be an architect. I loved perspective, and I love spaces and designing, and that sounded like a really romantic and wonderful thing to do. And I went to the orientation, 2 days before classes started, and I was like, oh, no, I don't have... I'm not smart enough for this. I don't have the math skills, for one. So I tried graphic design and enjoyed it, but just, we had 2 years to pick a major. And so you're taking core classes and just kind of dabbling around. And, I had to pick, and I wound up picking illustration. So not fine art was not even a blip on my radar screen. And it really should have been. I think Amy Poehler in her book said we shouldn't ask people what they want to do for a living. We should ask them what they don't want to do. And I think if I had answered that question, I probably would have wound up at fine art a whole lot sooner.
Well, it's a lot to ask of a person when they're 17, 18 years old. What are you going to do for a living? What are you going to do for a career?
What are you going to do with the rest of your life?
Yeah, I'm just now getting toward the end of being a teenager.
Yeah, I'm just scrounging together change in my car seat so I can get gas. I don't want to know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life.
Yeah, come on.
It's a bizarre thing.
Well, you remember what was that cartoon? Family Circle, right? And
yeah, in the
Bill
newspaper.
Davis. Yeah. And so little Billy would be asked by his mother to go get the mail out of the mailbox, and he would show a little map where he goes all over the yard and all over the neighborhood and bounces everywhere. And I think that's what really a lot of our lives are like sometimes, even as artists, is we're kind of like Billy going to the mailbox.
Yeah, we are. We're all on the same road, but the road is varying depending on where you are.
Yeah, but here you are today.
Yes.
I was looking at your art on your website and your gallery there, and it's very beautiful. Some of the things that I've noticed is there's a bit of nostalgia to it. I see a lot of old cars, old buildings, which is a subject matter. Well, I don't paint it. It's something I'm very interested in. Right. There's a certain nostalgia with old brick and mortars and buildings like that. And how would you describe yourself as an artist today in the subject matter that you do?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because it changes a lot. But really, what I've found, I have one rule: I only paint what I love to paint. And so, every 5 years I go through a different cycle, so I was painting a lot of cars and trucks. And now I'm really into the urban landscape a lot, especially here in the South, especially here in my hometown. All across the state, these agricultural capitals that we used to have they're vanishing. And I feel compelled to capture that in paint before it's too late. And change is inevitable, and it can be a wonderful thing. And I've seen it happen here in my hometown, where some of the places I like to paint because they were a little bit derelict or abandoned have been fixed up, and people are getting to use them. And I think that's exciting too. But I feel kind of panicky about getting out there and painting this stuff. But
you feel panicky. What do you mean by that?
Well, I just, painting down on the Forgotten Coast, doing that event down there. So that's like a 90-mile swath of Florida coastline that is literally old Florida. There are no high rises. It's where all the oysters and shrimp come from. Apalachicola River dumps out right there, Carabel River. But, every time I go down there every year, something else has been bulldozed. The Hurricane Michael came through there, Category 5, wiped an entire city off the face of the map. And I've painted stuff there where, a friend of mine and I, Leon Holmes, we painted some boats there one morning at a boat graveyard, and went to have breakfast and came back and they'd bulldozed the boat.
Oh,
so,
no.
There's stuff like that where I'm like, oh my gosh, any minute now somebody could come through here and remove this. And I think what's interesting about these older structures and these alleyways is that, they haven't been touched, and that it takes 30 years of neglect to get really interesting. And that's what I like. I just like crusty stuff. And that, for some reason, that makes my heart pitter patter. So that's just where I go.
Well, it is interesting that I find the same thing. I kind of like the textures and the rust, but now if it was my home, I wouldn't want that. But
well, therein lies the problem.
So why are we drawn to these to decay, and it becomes something beautiful in art? How does that happen?
I think it's all about the light. It's all about light. Light falling across anything to me is absolutely beautiful. So it could be a flower, it could be the Grand Canyon, it could be a fire hydrant, it could be an electrical box. To me, it's all about shapes and how those things fit together. So to me, it's just an abstract quality. But to me, it's also a subject matter that's interesting to me. But it really is all about the light and how those shapes come together and interact to make a pleasing composition and design. Now, would you want to hang it in your house? Probably not. But who knows? I've got a lot of people that love this stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's done beautifully. It's just, I liked. I forgot the name of the painting. I was just looking at it early this morning. It was a painting that won an award at the Booth Academy.
Yes.
And
Late Light.
Yeah, late light. That's it. It's a nice. It's kind of a wide format painting, which I love that. Yeah, it's a cinematic aspect ratio, and I'm seeing more and more artists use that.
I love that format.
Yeah. What draws you to it?
One of my favorites. Well, I think really naturally that's the way we see things. We've got two eyes, and that's just the way we see. And so to me, looking at a landscape or even an urban landscape, I tend to see it more widescreen than I do any other way. So I enjoy that format. I did it a lot, starting about 2 years ago, and haven't been doing it quite as much lately. But I've been doing some that are actually widescreen format. The 16:9 ratio. But I love movies too.
Yeah.
So that might have something to do with it. The TV screen, the windshield of the car, there are a lot of reasons. Right.
Is there any particular movie that has influenced the way you interpret a scene when you paint?
You know what? One of my favorite directors is David Lynch.
Yeah.
And when I look at his movies or his TV shows, they are moving paintings to me. But I think a really great director and a really great cinematographer, I love Martin Scorsese and, all the Godfather stuff, all the, everything Scorsese makes is great to me. Francis Ford Coppola. But I love David Lynch, but he's kind of creepy. So that kind of explains some of it.
So that goes back to your hard assassin roots.
Yeah, the dark side of David Boyd. But his movies are so strange. I can only watch them once. I watch them like I can never see that again.
Yeah,
I just can't do that to myself.
But see, that's the difference of cinema and a painting. A painting you see when it's hanging on a wall, a gallery wall, or in a museum. You go back and you see it, and you study it, you observe it, you look at it askance from a corner of your eye, it's something you keep coming back. But I'm not typically drawn to cinema that way. I don't like repeats a whole lot, but I love a repeat of a painting. I like to go back and see it.
Yeah, well, a beautiful painting stands on its own, right? You do want to visit it every day. You want to see it every day. It's a snapshot into another world. And it's not, it's not dramatic or not jarring or, it's just pleasant. It's pleasant. You bought it for a reason. It reminds you of something. It speaks to your soul. So completely different.
So this painting that we were talking about late night, it's 12 by 24. So
1224. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's wide format. I'll have to include a link to this or an image of this in the show notes if that's all right. But
absolutely.
But the right side is like the dominant thing is shadow. Mm-hmm. And then there's a kiss of light across the old brick building and the roadway in the the left-hand side of the painting.
Right.
How did you find this scene and decide to paint this?
Well, plein air is such a strange thing to me. I went out and painted with a friend of mine yesterday, and I was like, when I go out and paint, it's never about the painting that I'm painting, unless I've stalked that location and I've gone back to paint it. But, to me, it's like while I'm painting is when I see what I want to paint. And so I record, I'll shoot some video, I'll do some sketches, I'll take some photos, finish what I'm working on. But that one was kind of like that. And it's funny because I sent that painting to that Booth Arts Guild show because that is in downtown Cartersville.
Wow.
And I found that I was teaching a workshop up there in October, and I'd been to the booth, and I had taken a workshop there with Ray Roberts. He came up and did a 2-day, and he's one of my heroes. And but I'd never walked around downtown, and I was supposed to be doing an urban landscape workshop. So I better go do my homework. And so I wear a Fitbit. I think I walked 6.3 miles that day all around Cartersville. And that was the last thing I saw when I turned around to come back to the museum. And it was like, oh, and it's always behind you for me. It's never what I'm looking at. It's like when I give up and turn around and start heading the other direction is usually when I see it.
Wow.
But it was getting late. That's why I called it late light. The sun was starting to set and the shadows were starting to get interesting. And I took a quick photo and did a little sketch and did a small thumbnail for it, a little color study. And it actually started as a demo for my local art group. And they invited me to come in and paint. And so I showed them how I start a painting, which is with a monochromatic underpainting. So it's lived many lives, that painting, but it was very deliberately done, and that's when I do my best work.
So there's a story within the story.
There's always a story within the story within the story.
Yeah. I like the painting because it makes me as a viewer ask questions. If I walk this road, where does it go? Who are in the building? Why is, what was in this shed?
Where is everybody?
Yeah. And that's the amazing thing too. I always like things where the people are, I love people, but when people are missing, then you start asking questions. Did they just walk by and I just missed them?
Well, that's what I've always been drawn to. I was a huge Hopper fan, but what I loved about Hopper's work that I really admired was that there were no people in him. And so it was just kind of left empty. And I like solitude. I like to know that people are around, but I don't necessarily want them with me while I'm painting or while I'm appreciating something for how beautiful it is. And most of my cityscapes, they do not have people in them. I want you to feel like you're there by yourself, just like I was. And now I'm usually in alleys, so there are not people there anyway. But I know a lot of artists that put figures in their work, and it really makes a big difference. It does. It brings it back to life. But that's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah. No,
I want to feel solitude, and I feel solitude when I'm alone. How ironic.
Well, my old weird brain, I draw analogies on things that I've experienced. And one of the things I've done in the past with my photography is long exposures, and people disappear in long exposures. And an outdoor painting is almost like a long exposure. And so the people begin to fade out. I know that sounds totally wacko, but
no, it doesn't. It doesn't. I've actually, I mentioned Leon Holmes earlier. He and I had a really long conversation about plein air painting and how it really is. It's like when you say a slow exposure, but that's really a video. So that's kind of what plein air painting is. Everything is moved. Everything is in transition. The sun is moving, the shadows are moving, the grass is moving, the people are moving. So it's not a still. It's a living, breathing thing inside a format. It's just a great analogy.
Well, how do you go about developing a painting like this? You mentioned earlier about the ground and all that, but let's explore, your design decisions and then how you go about that process of painting this painting.
Well, that painting is really interesting because it was something. I'm sure we'll probably get into this later, but I've got young children and I don't have as much time as I used to.
I remember those days.
Yeah, you just, it's like, I got an hour. I can do so much with an hour. Where it used to be, I had 8-hour days and I got a lot done, but they were a little bit leisurely.
Yeah.
But, so this one was kind of worked on in spurts. But, to me, when I talk about that pitter patter and I talk about, my heart racing, that's telling me something. To me, that's telling my reptilian brain, my little reptilian art brain, that there's something about that is correct. So it's the light, it's, more dark, less light. Whatever the design thing is that captivates us in a great painting, I feel like that's the reaction that I'm having when I see that. And that's what I felt when I saw that scene. And I knew that it would be a painting, but, I couldn't rush right back into it. So I had to think about it for a while. And when I can sit back and think about a painting and really orchestrate it and plan out its design, that's when it works the best for me. So that painting was started as a series of photographs and then became a little 2x4 inch full color oil painting. And then
did you say 2 inch by 4 inch?
2 inch by 4 inch.
Get out! That's the size of a postage stamp almost.
Yeah, it's pretty small. But to me, it's all about familiarity. And, the more I see things, the more I fall in love with them, or I watch them. I did not have that luxury with this one. So in order for me to become familiar with it, I painted it a lot. So doing that small color study and then, doing a series of. Are
you doing that like in a sketchbook or just little scraps of paper or?
So that piece, I think I actually had a piece of, oil primed linen that was maybe an 8x10, and maybe I cut it down. Wow. I believe it's on an actual panel.
Wow. Okay.
And then I do a series of drawings in my sketchbook. I like that gray matters. Mm-hmm. Those gray sketchbooks, and I use black India ink or a brush pen and a white China marker and work out the design. So I did that. Did a couple of versions of that.
That sounds similar to what Scott Christensen does, but he uses that craft paper, which is a more
he uses the tan version of it, and he'll paint in his too, which I think is super cool.
Yeah.
But I made a decision about 2 years ago. I realized that when I started doing plein air, it was kind of when plein air was exploding, and I was seeing all these paint outs, and I was really excited by that. And when I got invited to do the Forgotten Coast, that was what I wanted to do. And I'd never been able to paint outside for 10 days in a row. And, something happened to me. I was able to see things. I could see paintings. And, that was so great. And continuing to go down there, the learning curve, was what was so appealing to me in the beginning.
Was it like a light bulb, or was it a gradual process where you? It
was a gradual process. Your eyes get used to looking at things in a different way. But I don't know where I was going with that necessarily. But I was just kind of jumping out of my car and painting. And I think after 2 years of doing it, I was like, I need to be more deliberate about what I'm doing. and I'm looking at my work and I'm realizing that the design is not as strong as it could be. The drawing's not as strong as it could be. And so I started, instead of jumping out of the car and reacting, I started doing a little bit more stalking, really looking at what I wanted to paint.
There's that assassin coming out again.
Yeah, exactly. Just kind of lurking around in the dark. But studying, and so I started doing drawings before I even started painting. I'd heard some great painters say, I never do a sketch because that sketch could kill the spontaneity of the other painting. But to me, it only enhances that experience.
Yeah.
And if I do a great little plein air painting, then I'm just kind of done with it. But if I do a plein air painting and there's something else that needs to be said, that's when I take it back to my studio and I get real thoughtful about it. But I feel like, my process has become more labored. I do a lot more drawing. I do a lot of color studies. I do a lot of thinking, but that works for me.
So what's the benefit of doing that?
To me, it's all about problem solving. If I were to jump into a 12 by 16 canvas, all of your problems are there waiting for you to run into, but if I do a sketch, then I've kind of solved all of my compositional issues, like doing a notan or a 3 or 4 value sketch. I've kind of worked out my composition. But then if I do a color study, for example, then I've worked out my color situation, the warms and the cools and maybe what kind of palette I'm going to pick. And then when I get to the big one, all of those questions have been answered. And now what I get to do is truly express what I want to express on the canvas, which is ultimately what we're all getting to.
Well, it sounds like it's a better use of time in a way. I mean, you I don't know if that's the right word, but I tell you,
it is.
Well, as a rookie, I just want to get into the painting.
Sure. Well, they tell you it's all about the easel time, right?
Yeah.
Time in front of the easel. But if you're not using your time wisely, you could be practicing bad habits. But what happened to me was, especially outdoors, for instance, I would say maybe, 3 or 4 out of 10 were really nice, strong paintings. But then after I started doing some sketching, it went way up. I'd say 8 and 10, were really good paintings and worthy of a frame if that's what you're after. But I think you have to ask yourself what it is. What are you doing out there? Why are you doing what you're doing?
So do you view an outdoor painting, plein air painting, as an end product or a study, or is it a combination of both? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
answer.
definitely a combination of both.
Yeah.
I did a demo. I was just at Plein Air South I guess it seems like a couple of weeks ago. I think it was last week. And I did a demo about using fewer materials, minimalist painting. I call it doing more with less. And, so you only have a few colors and a few brushes. And I'm a big fan of really just getting to know your format. So I've been really just doing a 3-to-4 ratio a lot. It makes it easy for plein air because I've got, you can do 6x8, 9x12, 12x16, 18x24. Right. So you have a lot of options, but it's all the same, so you're really getting used to how to compose inside that rectangle. But, it's just been really interesting. But I did a 30-minute gouache demo on a 6x8, and then I turned around and did a 6x8 in oil. But just to show them that it doesn't have to be a finished painting, and it can be about going outside and exercising, or doing some visual problem solving, or just doing your homework and just practicing.
Well, what are some common rookie mistakes that you see beginning artists or even experienced artists making over and over again?
Well, you see, people tell you the same thing, and I see it over and over again. Values is one thing that really trips people up. When you start adding color to the equation, people start getting really confused. Between
me too.
what's light and what's dark. Oh, I do too. It makes me crazy. Yeah. Charlie Hunter is like, that's why I don't do color. It's really hard. But the other thing, I see a lot of people coming coming from like where you're coming from, where you're just kind of picking it up. Maybe the kids are gone, you're retired, you're doing whatever. But not everybody has had the luxury of going to art school and getting to learn perspective or getting to learn anything about composition and design. And I think that's really hard. Everybody wants to paint, but to me, the painting part, the color part is, I used to paint houses too. And you say the same thing about houses. It's 90% prep,
Yeah.
and then 10% actually spreading the sunshine. So, you have to put in the time to learn to draw and to learn to compose. And that's really what's ultimately going to determine whether or not your painting is good or not, because you can finish it any way you want to, and you can use color, you can use flashy color, you can be a tonalist, you can be monochromatic, you can do a lot of different things. That's all individual taste. But what still sticks is a great composition and design and a really good drawing.
Yeah, I'm still learning that, but I am trying to apply that more, because you're not the first person to tell me that.
Yeah, so, that's definitely not my invention.
So, it's I need to wake up and start applying it.
Well, it's funny, I did go to art school and do all that stuff, but I was afraid of my own shadow. I came from this place where everybody knew me as the guy that did art. I thought I was a big deal, and I go to art school. I'm like, I've got nothing. I've got nothing. What am I doing here? And that took me a long time to get over. But because of that, I really never put myself out there. I was afraid to do something that I wasn't good at, and I didn't do enough drawing. And that's one reason 2 years ago, I was like, you just need to be honest with yourself. And you could draw a lot better if you really just focused on it, and really trying to work on the drawing and design, and hoping to start doing some figurative. And I love heads. I wanted to start painting head studies.
Sure.
So, but yeah, we all have our little Achilles heels. You have to be honest with yourself about where you need to put in the work, and then you need to put in the work. So
this thing about values, what was a turning point for you? Where did it come together?
I think there are a couple of turning points for me, and being at Plein South again last week, Kwang Ho was our speaker.
I regret missing that. I wished I could have gone.
Yeah, it's a really great thing. It's it's not a lot. It's 150. I think we had 130 or 150 participants, and maybe 15 or 20 faculty. And then we got our mainliner, and that was Kwang Ho, and he's a breath of fresh air. That guy, he's so excited about painting, and he paints from life. He paints from photos. He paints from his memory. He doesn't poo-poo anything. He's just glad to be here and excited about painting. And he did this lecture at American Impressionist Society about 5 or 6 years ago. And that was the first show that I got in with them. And I got an honorable mention from Kevin McPherson, who's one of my heroes. And, that was just unbelievable. And then listening to Kwang speak, and he was talking about these 8 modes of painting. And the first 2 that he mentioned were local tone painting and light and shadow painting. And he gave examples of those. He said that, Vincent van Gogh, for example, was a local tone painting. He was not really painting light shadow. He was painting comparisons, the ground to the sky, the trees to the water, and just, getting a feeling for what's going on out there. And then he said that Rembrandt was a light and shadow painting, and what he was painting was the illusion of light falling across a surface. And I had never thought of Rembrandt as a light and shadow painter. I considered him to be more maybe a tonalist or something. But then he showed a painting of a nose, and you could tell where the sun was coming from. You could tell where the light was coming from in the studio. And so I've been chasing that ever since, this idea that I need to be able to paint in those 2 modes. I need to be able to paint in light and shadow, a light and shadow painting, and I need to be able to paint a local tone, but I also need to know the difference. And 2 of the people that really helped me out kind of from afar and then up close and personal are Peggy Kroll Roberts and Ray Roberts, because they paint, to me, light and shadow better than just about anybody. And I did some work with Ann Blair Brown and Jim Richards here in Atlanta, and they really helped turn me around too, and just helped me simplify my process. Jim basically did a demo where he just mixed 3 puddles of gray, kind of like what Kevin McPherson does, and they were all different colors, and he did a beautiful painting just from those 3 puddles. And It really drove home to me that it really doesn't matter what the colors are. What really matters is the value structure. And Ann Blair Brown does something similar. She starts with an underpainting that's basically just 3 or 4 values. And they're just big shapes. And that was really liberating to me, that you don't have to paint all this or draw all this stuff and then paint it in. That really the fun is where you start with these big shapes and you break them down. But the idea of light and shadow is what I've really been working on, because I felt like I had the local tone thing. But Peggy and Ray are really exceptional painters of light and shadow.
Let's talk about the painting process a little bit more and the tools that you use.
Sure.
I like gear. Not everybody likes to talk about it, but I like the stuff. To me, it's fun.
I do. I've got a problem with stuff. That's why I did that doing more with less. I've got every easel, every paintbrush, every oil color that's ever been manufactured. It's ridiculous.
Well, part of it's experimentation. You think, well, if I do this, maybe that'll help with that, or it'd be fun to use. And
I do, but I think that's the trap.
Yeah.
I think that's the trap. And we can talk more about it, but
sure.
I certainly think less is more. And the more stuff I added to my kit when I was painting early, the worse it made me. Because you are looking for that magic bullet or whatever it is, and it doesn't exist.
So how did you simplify? So how did you make that transition to less?
I noticed things happening. First of all, I am 46 years old, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and you can get whatever you want, and it's even worse now, because now there's Amazon. You don't even have to leave your house to get whatever you want. But I just realized that every time I went to a workshop, or every time I listened to a podcast, I would get on my phone and I would buy that thing. And in the beginning, I was using it.
That's why we
playing with it, and then exactly.
you have found out our evil scheme.
Yeah, got you pegged now. But once I found out that I was just getting those things, and then I would find them and I had never used them, I was like, oh, okay. Basically, what you're doing now is hoarding stuff. And I do this thing where I bring like 30 brushes with me when I go outside, and I only use one.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why do I have so many? What is going on here? But now as I've painted more and more, I'll get out 2 or 3 or 4 brushes, but they're all, they're one's in the light and one's in the dark. And there's a big one for the light, a big one for the dark, and a small one for the light, a small one for the dark. And I don't wash my brushes as much, but, I've got, vases full of paintbrushes that I never use. And, I just donated a ton of paint to a group here called Backstreet Arts. And what they do is give people a safe place to do art, people that maybe are in transition or just don't have the money to be able to paint. So I donated all of my tubes of paint that I don't use.
Well, that's great.
Well, it worked for me. It was in my way, and but it was all experimentation, like
Sure.
you're saying.
Yeah.
I was just buying different brands and different colors, and because we always think it's about the color. But I became a Michael Harding ambassador about 2 years ago, and I used their paint for a full year before I decided I would join those ranks. And I love their colors, and I love their paint.
So what makes them stand out over others that you've tried?
To me, it's the richness of the pigmentation, and that there's no monkey business going on.
By monkey business, what do you mean?
Fillers or solvents that have been kind of put in the paint because, not everybody has to put all of the ingredients on the label. But Michael does not use anything but linseed oil and pigment. Everybody gets the pigment from the same place. What makes Lucas less expensive than Michael Harding is the amount of filler that's in it. So people put beeswax in it to make them all the colors naturally do not act the same. Some colors are thick, some are thin, some are like toothpaste, some are more runny. But a lot of people will put fillers in them to make the pigment go longer, so they can make a less expensive paint. Or they'll put beeswax in it to make the consistency, the viscosity the same. But the richness of the pigmentation, even though the paint is expensive, and it's not as expensive as some other brands, I find it to be relatively reasonable. But the paint lasts longer because it is so strong. Well,
that's what I was thinking. The pigment would allow you to get more mileage out of the tube, I suppose.
You do. I don't use the paint nearly as thickly as I used to. And if I were using it more thickly, then I might think about cutting it back with some cold wax or something. But I prefer to do that on my own.
Yeah.
I love their stuff right out of the tube. That's my favorite way to paint right now is to just use the paint because that's really what I enjoy.
Is it available here in Georgia? I don't know any art supply dealer that's.
Yeah, you can get it at the Dick Blick that's on Peachtree that used to be.
Oh yeah, it used to be Utrecht. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
there
I think
they've
Street. Got it.
Yeah.
Binders used to carry it, but I think that because they're independent, they're struggling a little bit. But I order everything from Jerry's, Artorama, or Dick Blick, and then I can get to their distributor and they can get me paint. But that really helped me simplify because then I wasn't, what does this stuff feel like? Well, first of all, I tried everything. I think the only type of paint I haven't experimented with is that Rublev paint.
Have you tried the Vasari? I know
I've tried Vasari. Yeah. When I did the Scott Christensen workshop, I bought all the Vasari stuff. And they make a really nice paint, but they don't have an ingredient label on the back. So you don't know. I don't think they're doing anything sneaky by any means, but they don't, if you look at a color, like sap green, for example, sap green is a mixture of different colors. But if you flip the tube over, you can see what pigments have been used to create that color. I like to know what's in it. So I can tell people, well, you're not using a pure color, you're actually using a mixture. So know that before you start using it.
So are you exclusively using Michael Harding paints, or do you still mix other brands in your
No,
your kit?
I don't. The only color that I use that is not Michael Harding is my white. And I use a quick dry Gamblin white.
Yeah.
It's it's really best for plein air painters because it sets up pretty quickly, but it's not fast matte. It doesn't set up immediately. But that just helps speed the drying times because the paint is rich, and so it doesn't dry out as fast. It doesn't have all the fillers in it that a lot of the other brands have.
So are you painting with a limited palette? Is that what you're?
I consider it to be limited, but others might argue otherwise.
well, please elaborate.
Well, I'll tell you what I do. I was going to walk over there, but I can look at it from here.
Okay.
So I've got cadmium yellow, which is a warm yellow. And then always I have alizarin crimson, and always I have ultramarine. Sometimes I have cadmium red light, but usually I just kind of mix an orange with their cad yellow and their alizarin crimson. And it's that mixture is really a nice mixture for orange. A lot of them are kind of on the blue side, but theirs is not. It's a really lovely orange.
Now their alizarin, is it a permanent or is it the?
They have a couple of different versions. Now this alizarin crimson is the dangerous type you're not supposed to paint with. And by dangerous, I mean it turns to pink if you leave it in direct sunlight for 100 years.
Well, let's not do that.
Yeah, let's not do that, people.
Okay.
I am thinking about changing. I've tried their permanent version is called Claret, Claret, called alizarin Claret. But it's not the same.
No.
It's duller. It's not as exciting. But he gave me. That's the other thing I like about Michael Harding is I know Michael, and I know his wife Karen, and they know my family, and they ask about my kids, and they ask about my wife, and that's why I live in Newnan. Everybody knows who I am, and I like to go into the stores, and people, want to know how you are. That's lovely to me.
Yeah.
But he gave me a color to try while I was down there, and it was I think it was called Crimson Lake. So it looks just like alizarin crimson, but it's actually warmer. So it looks like a red violet a little bit, but it's not. It's really kind of warm. So I might switch over to that. It's more permanent. And then I'll mix up a violet. I get a nice clean violet with the alizarin and the ultramarine. I've got especially when I go to the coast, I'll take. They have something. Is phthalo and zinc white. It's a mixture, so it almost looks like cerulean. And it's a beautiful, beautiful color. It doesn't take much. It's great for skies and, warm shadows and things like that. And then they've got this bright green color that I love called Bright Green Lake. I call it a dumbed down phthalo. It's a phthalo with a whole bunch of white in it. Great. Those two colors are great for punchiness that you can't really get out of a super limited palette.
It sounds kind of like what Matt Smith, he recommends. It's a Grumbacher greenish yellow. It's kind of along those lines. I don't know the quality, but
I'm familiar with that color because I've looked at his. He actually came to the Harding booth when we were in Tucson, so it was fun to get to show him around.
Yeah.
The colors, because I know he's very specific about what he uses, and I know he's still using that stuff. But yeah, it's kind of the same deal. It's a great punchy color without having to go to a darker green. I usually have Viridian on my palette too, and then I like to have an earth. I like to have an earth palette too. So I've got yellow ochre and Venetian red and raw umber, and so it's a pretty big palette, but it's manageable. I tried using a very limited palette, and I just found it to be too limiting. So I don't want to use I don't want to use too many colors, but I also want to be.
So it's a good working set.
It's a good working set. I think personally, I think the best thing to do is the split primary, where you've got a warm and a cool of all the primaries. And I did a painting yesterday where I didn't use any earth tones. So I'm trying to I feel like I use them as a crutch a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to purge myself of my earth colors. But I love just painting in the earth palette. I love painting just yellow ochre and ultramarine and Venetian red. I think that's just a ton of fun.
Well, how do you start off a painting?
I always do an underpainting. I know a lot of people I start differently every single time. I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
I wish I was, but I just got to be honest. I am. Right. I'm a creature of habit, and sometimes I'll blow caution into the wind and try something different. But I'm still experimenting and growing, and so we all have to have somewhere to go. But I do start with an underpainting. I like to use raw umber as my underpainting because it's a weaker color. It dries pretty quickly, and if it is still wet when I paint it on top of it outdoors, it's just weak. It's relatively benign. So really all it does is it kind of grays out my color, which can be really nice anyway. So that's kind of how I start. I like to look at the silhouette kind of like a notan and just kind of get what's the big light shape and what's the big dark shape. And then I start breaking it down from there into, 2 or 3 or 4 more values. And then I'll sit back and look at that for a while and just make sure that's exactly what I want. Sometimes weeks, just depending on what I've got going on, and make sure that composition is good.
Yeah. So it sounds like you may be working on multiple paintings at a time.
Yeah, recently I have been. I'm looking at 2 or 3 paintings I've got out right now that are kind of in various stages of completion.
I have a hard time with that, but
I get it.
I'm just not a good multitasker. My brain gets stuck on one thing, and it's part of my naivety, or being in the beginner mode, if you will, I suppose. But
I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily true. I didn't really start doing multitasking, and I don't even really think about it like that, because really they're just, one might reach its end, and then I literally pick it up, and I've got several easels around. I just move it. I take the next one to the next stopping spot and stop, and then. But that's not always the norm for me. Usually I am just I like to put all my attention into one.
Do you like to, what type of surfaces do you like to paint on?
I've been experimenting with that a lot recently. But my go-to has always been, the Centurion oil primed linen that, I think is the Jerry's Artarama house brand. It's a really affordable oil primed linen. It's not an aggressive weave. I like something a little bit slicker, but it's still got a little pull. And I do like an oil primed surface, because I like to be able to manipulate the paint on the surface. I like to be able to wipe it out and scrape it out and put it back on, and can't really do that with an acrylic primed surface.
Yeah.
But I've been playing around with, and I've painted on birch and Luan. I like all that stuff. But with Dibond, the aluminum stuff that everybody's kind of been talking about, I've been playing around with that, because you can basically get it from a sign shop, and you can cut it down to any size. You just have to put your ground of choice on it. So I've been using, Michael Harding has this called a non-absorbent acrylic primer, which is his way of saying, that's really what a lot of gessos are these days. It's not rabbit skin glue and size. It's an acrylic primer. But his acrylic primer is non-absorbent, so it's non-toxic, and it dries quickly and cleans up with water. But you can still manipulate the paint on the surface without it absorbing into the gesso.
Yeah, you don't have to worry as much about oiling out and that sort of thing.
Exactly.
As because it won't sink into it.
No, it does not. And it's it's kind of nice to play with. It's a great surface. I put it on some museum board that I cut down to 6x8, because the Centurion doesn't make a 6x8. And so I primed these 6x8s with that, and I use them for both gouache and oil. So when I go outdoors, I've got both types of paint with me, and I can do whatever I want. I can paint an oil study, or I can do a gouache study. So that's kind of nice. I couldn't do that before. You can't put gouache on an oil primed linen. That's not a good scene.
You had mentioned earlier that you don't paint as thick as you used to. How did that decision come about? I some paintings I look at, they're just dripping thick. It's almost like a 2D, 3D sculpture on canvas or whatever. But what made you decide to go in the opposite direction?
I think it just kind of happened organically. When I first started painting, I was painting kind of large, because I just love large paintings. I love little paintings too, but I've always loved really big paintings, just because of the impact it has on you. And I was using a cheaper paint, and I really wasn't good with edges, so I was using a palette knife, and people really seemed to enjoy that, and I was selling them pretty well, and I just needed to keep myself in art supplies. So I think when I kind of changed my, I went and did the Scott Christensen 10-day thing and studied with some other people, and I just kind of refined my process, and it just kind of became, I just didn't use as much paint. But I think subconsciously too, when I switched to Michael Harding, I was like, all right, that's a $5 stroke of paint. That's a $2 stroke of paint. But I've really gotten over that. And I'm looking at one painting of mine right now that's a 6 foot by 7 foot painting, and it's just covered in paint. I just love the texture of paint. So I'm trying to just get over that. I've never been the person that squeezes out a little bit of paint. I squeeze out a lot of paint. I'm really trying to get back into that mode because I love, that's what I love about oil is the texture, but you can say a lot with thin passages of paint and you don't need all the thickness, but there is something about a painting that's got a lot of paint on it that I find to be very alluring.
Yeah, I like it either way. You go into a museum, you see it all, and yeah,
you do,
and there's beauty in it all. So I'm just always curious about what goes through people's minds about that. I had heard from some though that the palette knife paintings tend to sell, and that's not our motivation necessarily in creating art. I mean, we do want to sell our stuff, but it does seem to sell well. People. The public that buys it seems to like that effect, if you will.
I do. They do. It's really interesting because there's some people that do palette knife painting very well, and when somebody really knows how to use it, it's a beautiful thing. I like to do a combination of both. Sometimes I'll use the palette knife to apply thick passages that I kind of knock back with my palette knife. But mostly what I use my palette knife for these days is scraping paintings back and then putting paint back on.
I do a lot of that.
yeah, everybody loves a good scraper.
That's how I create my grays. I paint my painting and then scrape it all off, and there I got a big puddle of gray.
That's it.
Gotta start over.
Lemonade
maybe I'll
and
get
those
it right.
lemons.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, one of the things I've been finding fascinating too is how people choose to display their art. Do you prefer to have it framed? Do you make your frames? How do you source your frames? How do you choose your frame for your paintings, or do you frame them?
Yeah, I try most of my stuff is done on a panel.
Yeah.
So I do frame. I use JFM up in Atlanta. They're a wholesaler, and they've got some really nice frames, and the prices are pretty good. So I typically frame anything that's worthy of a frame gets put in a frame. But I do have some larger pieces that are a little bit, I say they're a little bit more contemporary, but that's only because the subject matter is a little bit grittier than what I would normally do. But they're just on the museum wrapped canvas. I have some people that make the stretchers for me because it's really expensive to get them shipped, and then they're not as good as I want them to be. But I think I would like to put them in frames too. But I would do like a floater type of frame. I really like the way a floater looks, but it's difficult to do when you're not using a cradle panel.
That reminds me, did you see the John Cleveland exhibit at the Booth Museum?
No, I haven't been up there since Kwang Ho and Scott Christensen had their show up there, so I haven't seen anything.
Oh my goodness! Well, he was in the down in the Borderlands Gallery, which is down in the basement of the booth there.
Yeah,
and that's where the Booth Guild paintings, I believe, are displayed as well. But he had an exhibit there, and he made his frames, floater frames, out of angle iron. And he does these large paint. They were amazing. He's a Georgia artist too. Yeah, but it was a cool effect. I thought this is a neat idea. I liked it.
Right.
I mean, I don't know that I would do it, but I just thought it really worked for his type of painting that he did.
I would love to learn to frame. I'd love to learn to do. I've seen people make their own floater frames, and I'd love to do that. But what I really want to learn to do is to do gold gilding.
Oh yeah.
And then put everything. I'm such a, I mentioned I'm a creature of habit. I would just almost put everything in a gold floater frame and just call it done.
There you go.
Because it looks nice. It's clean. It's simple. If it doesn't match your house, then there's something wrong with your house. And why are you buying paintings that match your house anyway? But I like just that little dark edge around the edge of the painting, and that little pop of gold with some red kind of showing through. Just really very handsome.
Yeah, it is. It works. It's worked for decades.
Well, someday I'll learn to make my own frames, and I would like to do that. But right now, I'm just treading water.
I know. My problem is focus. I like to do it all.
Yeah.
It's just I lived in the digital world for so long that now I want to do everything kind of hands-on, analog.
I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
Oh well, what do you do?
There's only so much time in the day, apparently.
So you have a gallery?
I do have a gallery.
Well, what's that like? Where is it, and what's it like to have your own gallery?
It's frightening.
Yikes!
It's absolutely frightening.
What were you thinking, David?
I don't know how it happened, and I was talking to everybody. Oh, galleries, the galleries are dying. How are they going to stay on top of things? How are they going to keep it together? And then I open a gallery. Like, what am I doing? Well, it just kind of landed in my lap, and I've got just enough ego to say, I'd love to have my name on a gallery.
Well, where is it? Is it in Newnan?
It's in downtown Newnan, historic downtown Newnan, as we call it. It's really a family affair. The building that we are in was owned by my grandfather on my mom's side, and he passed away when my mom was in college, so I never knew him. But he owned some real estate as investment, and always rented them out. And so my mom and dad bought the building from my grandmother in the mid '80s, and Dad was an editorial cartoonist, and basically used his printing business as a front to syndicate his cartoons and a way to bring in more income. So he had his printing business in this building. And so I grew up here, and the basement was the dark room, and he had all the offset printing presses and the paper cutters and paper folders. And then upstairs, he had all the Letraset machines and all the light tables and, all that kind of stuff.
Do you still have all that stuff?
Oh my gosh, if only. So in the mid '90s, when desktop publishing came around, that was kind of the end of that for my dad.
Yeah.
He was not interested in learning this computer stuff. It took the love out of it for him a little bit. And he just didn't see where it fit into his world. He was using Xerox machines to syndicate, to print the cartoons. And people were just not. Dad's an artist, he just wasn't interested. I do have some artifacts. Now he had the oldest A.B. Dick printing press, I think, in the country. It was over 100 years old at the time, and they would corporate would bring people to this little print shop to show them this printing press that was still running, 9 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
I do have this camera. So we have this 2 foot by 2 foot camera, box camera, and it's about 6 feet long. When you unwind the bellows, it's absolutely, it's a piece of art unto itself. But that's the only thing that we really have left, unfortunately.
Yeah, hang on to that camera. Well, no, it's not for me to tell you what to do.
Well, no, that's why I've got it. And the dark side of David Boyd. I'm looking for a gurney to put it on with wheels, and then we're gonna display it. So I wanted to use it. I wanted to rebuild the dark room.
So what kind of what type of film does it take on the back?
I got too many ideas and not enough time.
So the 2 by 2 foot camera. I mean, what kind of film back does that have?
It was a large format. So basically the back of it it's crazy. So Dad would buy this film that would come in these 18 by 24 boxes. And the back of the camera was a door, and there was a vacuum that attached to the back of the door, and basically a pegboard. And you would put that piece of film on that pegboard, and it would just suck it up to it. And then you would close that door and flip on the light. It's just crazy. Camera's built in the 1860s. And I show it to people, and they're like,
I want to see this thing. I do.
I'll send you some pictures. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And it still works. So
I do. I used to do, it's been in hiatus for about a year now, another podcast called The Artful Camera. So you can see I kind of perked up there. I almost turned this podcast into the camera podcast.
Yeah, we'll follow that rabbit hole. Well, look, I'm a photo bug. I'm a shutter bug.
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of medium format cameras, and I love Polaroid, believe it or not, any type of instant photo stuff.
Well,
when I taught high school, I realized these kids have never seen a real photo. Everything's on their phones. And I was like, oh my God, you don't know what a Polaroid is? They're like, oh yeah, we've heard the Outcast song, Shake It Like a Polaroid Picture. So yeah, but what is that?
So a good friend of mine runs the Polaroid 20 by 24 project.
Oh.
His name is John Reuter. He's also an artist, but he has kept that legacy alive for decades. And
you're going to have to send me some information on that.
I will. I'll send you a link to it.
Check that out. I've used my Polaroid pictures, the Impossible project that continues to make or tried to make Polaroid. I've been using their products since they came out. So some of my paintings are based on black and white Polaroids.
Yeah, tell me about this. I want to hear about this. So how does that work? How does the Polaroid inform your paintings?
Well, sometimes they're just so terrible. They're wonderful. And, I love this monochromatic. Yeah. I love light and shadow, but I also love, overcast, grimy, gritty. And it just doesn't get any better than a black and white Polaroid to me. The quality is so much better, but I've based a lot of, just playing around really, but little monochromatic paintings that are based on some of my black and white photos.
There's almost an abstract quality to some of those old Impossible Project SX70 film that I've shot with my old SX70. So
I've got one of those. That's usually what I use.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love photography, and a lot of people are poo-poo photography when it comes to painting, or that you can't trust a photo. But you know what? If you're an artist, you can take a photo, you can compose a photo, you can figure out ways to get the light and shadow information. You can use Photoshop to move stuff around. I think photography is just a great tool. And in the beginning, I was a photographer. I really loved taking photos. And I did a lot of stuff here. There's a show not far from here called Slow Exposures that's every year. And I got into that show a couple of times, and just, that was my first foray into fine art, honestly, was being around all these fine art photographers, and it was just awesome.
Well, I'm seeing a light at the end of this rabbit hole, so I want to get back to the gallery story.
Yeah,
I realize I just sent us down this long tunnel.
Apologies to the listening crowd that just turned the channel, if they could turn the channel.
But isn't it true though that artists, some of my favorite artists, tend to be people who make connections with unrelated things. Like recently I spoke with Lynn Schmiel. Gardening is a big part, and nature is a big part of what informs the art that he does.
Right.
And so here you said you started off in photography, and you're influenced by some of the analog type photography that helps. I don't know. It seems to create these sparks of inspiration that leads to other forms of expression.
Well, I think true creativity is being able to draw connections that people couldn't really see before.
Yeah.
And photography to painting is not that big of a leap, but they go hand in hand for me. But I love photography. I love fine art photography.
So your gallery is in downtown in the old square, I guess, area.
That is correct. In our family building. We had been renting it out from the time Dad closed the printing business in '95 until about 2 years ago.
Where is it on the square there?
It's 14 East Washington. So technically we are in the northeast quadrant, one block off the square.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So if you know where Golden's restaurant is, that's probably the oldest landmark. We're right off the back corner of that. It's an old brick building.
I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing for lunch one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Come see me. Let me know when you're coming.
That's a deal. So
somebody came in yesterday to pick up a painting, and they were eating in Golden's.
Oh wow!
I was like, well, come over whenever you're ready.
So what's it like to run a gallery and still practice your craft? And how do you balance that? It's
really, really fun. I love the gallery, and I love. Originally, what we were going to do is I was going to represent myself, and trying to create a market for my dad, who's doing a lot of painting. and all of his Jeff Foxworthy cartoons, and just trying to create a collector base for him. And both of my sisters are artistic as well.
Wow.
And my mom she's an artist, but she had to raise babies.
That's the finest art of all.
Exactly. I think so. And both of my sisters paint, and one of them is a cake designer. And so just trying to find a way to showcase our talent. So that's why I called it the Boyd Gallery. And I was like, look, you guys bring me stuff and I'll see what we can do with it. And then as a side note, we were going to have one gallery space that was designated for pop-up shows. And that was kind of how we were going to do what we were going to do, because I don't want to be open 5 days a week or 6 days a week. I want to be open a couple of days a month, and I want people to come in all at the same time. So how do you keep them coming in? I knew I was going to be turning over a lot of work, and Dad might too. But the answer to me was to help other artists and give them an opportunity to set something up just for a couple of days in a small space and just see what happens. And so that's grown and morphed into people taking over the whole gallery. I've turned my studio, which is in the basement of the gallery, into my gallery. And then I also have a school here, the studio school at Three Hearts Farm, where I do a lot of teaching, and I've invited a lot of my plein air friends to come and teach too. So we can offer them, well, you can stay at the farm and you can teach a workshop, but we could also host a pop-up show for you here at the gallery, which is a nice, I love plein air painters, but we're like a bunch of gypsies. It's like, well, if I'm coming to your town, we're going to do it all. I'm coming in my minivan, and let's put on a show, and let's have a paint out, and let's teach a 4-day workshop. And, they want to do as much as they possibly can. And, they love that idea. Well, bring 20 pieces with you too, and we'll hang those up.
That is great. So how are you finding the market in Newnan? How receptive are people to purchasing art?
Yeah, people buy a lot of my art here. I've been here forever, and I'm on the tips of everybody's tongue. But I knew that when I opened this gallery that Newnan could not support what we were doing. I needed a bigger audience. So that's kind of what I'm working on now, is trying to build up a national reputation, doing a little bit more advertising on a national level, and just trying to get it figured out. It goes very well, and we sell enough. But the thing is, we own the building, which is fantastic. I say we, my mommy and daddy own the building, but I pay them commission on everything that's sold. That's how we pay the rent here. It's they get their percentage, and then I sell Dad's stuff, so he gets a percentage of his stuff, and I keep a percentage, and I keep him in materials. That's the deal.
Yeah.
He paints, I buy materials, I frame, I sell, I meet people when they come pick up paintings. But it has been a little bit of a distraction because I don't have as much easel time as I had. And I think you were talking about this earlier too. I guess I'm a control freak. The older I get, the more terrible things I find out about myself. But I think I have a really hard time surrendering control. But, if you're a social media guy, I had enough trouble doing my own Facebook, Instagram, website for myself. But then to do that for a school with a Facebook and Instagram presence, and you've got teachers coming in every 3 or 4 months, and then to do it for a gallery that has an opening every month was just too much. So I've hired some people to help me with the social media, and I have somebody who manages our workshops, and she's helping me take control over some of the things with the gallery, updating the website, doing stuff like that. So I'm learning to delegate.
It's a tough lesson to learn, but it has its benefits when done well. So that's good.
It does. So it's been fun, and I've really enjoyed it. So we'll keep on keeping on.
Well, what's next for you?
That's a really good question. when I first started painting, I found plein air through Millie Gosh, who's from Newnan, and is just she's the real deal. She's a real artist, and she's a plein air painter. And I don't think I call myself an outdoor painter because I like to paint outdoors, but the plein air thing was my life for a long time, and I did the most I've ever done was 6 shows in a year, and that was a lot to do. And having a new family, I'm trying to use my art as a way to create my life here in Newnan so that I don't have to travel as much. It's really hard for me to travel. I don't want to be away from my kids. My daughter's 7 months old, and when we wake up in the morning, I'm like, who is this baby? She woke up a different person. Yeah. And my son's growing so fast, and I'm an older dad. I don't want to miss any of that.
No, I don't blame you at all.
The gallery is part of that. And the school is part of that. I bring, what I love about the plein air events is the camaraderie. So I try to bring the camaraderie here to me. And then I also helped start a plein air event down in Meriwether County called Open Air Meriwether. We have just got, 20 artists from around the Southeast that come and paint with us. But, it's not a competition. We really don't sell any paintings, but we can stay in this beautiful location and paint. I'm not doing as much plein air. The plein air is not the end all to be all. I'm really working towards doing larger studio pieces. I've got the space to do it, and that's what I've always wanted to do. So I'm painting really large paintings from still life studies and from photographs.
Very nice.
That's the plan.
Yeah, that's the plan, right? There's always plan B.
Yeah, and C and D and E.
Well, David, where's the best place for people to go to find out about you?
Well, I think the best place to find out about me is probably Instagram. It's the place that I post the most frequently. Facebook, I also share that stuff to Facebook, but I just don't spend quite as much time there. And then something that's a little bit more static, if you really just want to dig into the artwork, is to look at my website, and that's davidboydjr.com, as in David Boyd Jr. And on Instagram, I'm David Boyd Jr. Fine Art.
Well, it's been a real pleasure talking with you. I feel like there are several additional episodes that we could do, and maybe we will do.
You call me anytime.
I will. And I'm going to join you for lunch down there. I'm going to buy your lunch in Newnan.
Well, that sounds great. You do come see us. Just let me know when you're coming. I'd love to have you come down.
Well, thanks for being
what's going on.
Thanks for being on the Artful Painter podcast.
I enjoyed it, Carl. Thanks for asking me.
I hope you enjoyed hearing from David Boyd Jr. It was a fun conversation for me to have with him. In fact, I look forward to visiting him at his gallery in Newnan, Georgia in the very near future so that we can continue our conversations there. To learn more about David and to see his beautiful paintings, visit his website at davidboydjr.com. Before we wrap up this show, I want to thank all you listeners that help support this show. Some of you bought Lynn Schmill's gorgeous book, An Authentic Nature. I appreciate that. I know Lynn does too. So thank you so much for doing that. It's still available, so you can find the link to that book in the episode show notes for Lynn Schmill. That's the one before this one. Also, I want to give a big thank you to all of you that bought my handmade sketchbooks. I was really encouraged by the support and the response. So I think I sold probably well over half of what I have in my store. I need to make a few more, and I will in the next 2 or 3 weeks and make them available. So thank you for that. It helps offset the cost of this show. Plus, they're just a lot of fun to do. So I thank you for that. It's a little outlet for me. I also appreciate the feedback that you keep sending me. For example, John Moon sent me an email with this subject line, new listener. Now, before I continue with this, I just want to say it makes me happy. I'm really thrilled when I hear that new listeners are coming on board to the Artful Painter. So thank you for joining our community. John goes on to write, "Hey, Carl, great podcast. I also stumbled onto your YouTube channel And the first one that I watched was the one where you went to Goodwill to find art books. This struck a tone with me because I have been doing that for the last year or so. I love finding obscure art books. Like you, I also have a background in photography and filmmaking. I am also new at all of this, but have always loved art. I started out a couple of years ago with acrylics and watercolors. I fell in love with oil painting. Something about the richness of color and the way you can mix and change a scene. I also love the smell of the house when I walk in with oil paint filling the air. Love the podcast. Very well done, and it doesn't seem forced. Keep it up. John, thank you. And with an email like that, you can bet I'm going to keep it up. I'm going to keep producing this show. So thank you for that feedback. And yeah, I love finding good art books. And I'll provide a link in the show notes so that you can find that video that he was talking about. I did it probably a couple of years ago. But I love finding a good deal on an art book. Now, I love reading on an iPad. It's cool. I do a lot of reading on the iPad, but when it comes to art books, I really prefer a hard copy because of the beautiful reproductions. A lot of times art books are oversized, so you can really see the images well. And so to me, it's just a lot of fun to find art books. And it's fun to find old art books. And one of my videos, I talk about an art book that I found. It was published in the 1840s. And when I got the book, it had an inscription in it, and there was quite the story behind that. Did a little sleuthing, and one of the listeners in my audience helped me figure it out. And it became quite a fascinating story. So I'll provide a link to that video as well. It's quite fascinating. Hey, I love hearing from everyone, so if you want to send me a note just like John did, go to my website at carlolson.tv and click the Contact tab. That's all you have to do. Fill in your message and I'll get it right away. Thank you for listening to The Artful Painter. I'll see you in the next episode.
Picture on the TV.